Hi, my name's Nicholas and I live on a 102-year-old wooden boat, Argonaut 2, and this year I'm taking it up the remote coastline of British Columbia to retrace its history as a medical mission boat. This week, we are going to step back in time and take a much anticipated tour of the interior of Argonaut. But first, let me catch you up on my travels. Last week, I got deeper into the history of Argonaut as I traveled further up the inside passage, making a quick stop to the abandoned cannery in Namu, reaching Bella Bella, and then going north to Briggs Inlet, where there's some dramatic scenery in the mountains of the coastline of BC. This past week, I briefly popped outside of the inside passage with Tally Ho, another boat I've been cruising with, to say goodbye before they crossed the Heket Strait to Haida Gwaii. We had a lovely fire on the beach on a beautiful evening before I got trapped in a week's worth of rain. I used my time to perform a little fix on the outboard of Little Argo, explored some more coastline myself, and just in general enjoyed the beauty of being in a remote place in a rainstorm. We'll get to that tour of Argonaut, but first, let's deal with some outboard issues. Here is the shifting lever, and that pushes a shifting rod back and forth here. This piece here shore off this shifting unit. And so I'm going to set up shop here in the engine room, trying to jerry-rig a fix. First thing, I'm going to put a little grease on the drive shaft. What I'm going to try and do is take a piece of scrap wood that I have and make my own shifter out of the piece of wood. Don't judge me on the result of this. Forward, neutral, reverse. This should get me hopefully through the next 2 weeks. So a lot of you have been asking for a tour of Argonaut, and I know that's something that I've owed. There is just so much character and beauty in here that I really want to give everyone the feeling that you get of walking back in time as you go through the boat. I'm going to start with up top here in the pilot house. Right here is where I would sit. There is a chair that folds down here that you can kind of sit up on as you are underway. And here I have all my instruments. These are navigation lights. Here's an anchor light and a cabin light. As far as instruments I have an anemometer. Here's my electrical, a beautiful Chelsea ship clock, air pressure gauge, which is the pressure of the air start system, oil pressure. This is a barometer. And lastly, I have the water temperature of the exhaust at the head of the engine. What I really love about the boat are the details. And there's all these little neat things that I'm going to try to point out along the way. The first is every room has an engraving as to what it is. And so here it says certified wheelhouse or pilot house. Up forward here, there are some original signal flags used to communicate between ships. Each flag represents a different alphanumeric symbol. My engine controls, this is my reduction gear, which I use to switch to forward and reverse. This is a throttle, beautiful ship's wheel with a compass that is lit either through natural light. There's a light switch inside that helps light it up at night. The helm is chain to cable, and the cables run down the sides of the boat back to chain to the steering post, which turns the rudder back and forth. The windows drop down into these slots, and then you use this leather strap to pull the window up. Right now I'm walking aft into the chart room, and this is where I spend most of my time. And looking forward, previous owners installed a TV that I used to watch movies here. Another interesting change is this opposing bench, where previously there was actually a wood stove right here in the back, so you can heat this room. I do have beautiful radiant heaters. In the wintertime, I have a furnace to run hot water through the radiators that absolutely cranks a ton of heat down here. These are gimbal lights, which is pretty cool. They'll remain upright as the boat rocks and forth through the sea. And then right here is a 1920s era lamp. Some mahogany trim ceilings on the frames. One of the details I really love are these little navy anchors at the bottom of the drawstrings for the lights. now walking forward, there's a pretty steep companionway that runs down a stairs or a ladder down below. Here is the compass housing for that wood Freeman. And this housing comes off, and underneath is the compass that is used to drive the boat. So this compass is turned by that mechanism up top through like a torsion cable that runs into this little gear set in the back. And that spins this compass to search for the little cat whisker. It tells the autopilot to reverse direction, and it'll spin a couple turns one way, a couple turns the other way, back and forth indefinitely the entire time the autopilot's operating. Also looking up, here is the chain to cable throttle and reduction gear, those two wheels in the pilot house. Spinning those actually turns and runs these cables down into the engine room, which is right here. Right now I'm turning forward into the main stateroom where I have a hanging locker immediately to port. And then in here is a queen size mattress. Forward I have a chain locker housing a combined about 700 feet of chain. I have about 400 feet of chain on the starboard anchor and 300 feet of chain on the backup port side anchor. There's a few hanging lockers forward, much more than I will ever need for all my clothes. Below the bed are some cabinets, as well as some cabinets here. And then here is a little desk, which I'll sometimes use if there's people up top and I just need some privacy for a quick phone call or meeting. I don't know if this is gonna come out, but this says, certified to accommodate 3 seamen. Okay, I'm walking aft from the stateroom. Here's the companionway into the engine room, which I'm gonna do a full tour of the engine room in another video, so I'm not gonna get too into it. But I have a Gardner 6L3 diesel engine, a big workbench above my battery bank. Here's my still working DC panel at 24 volts. And last year I converted to an all Victron system, stepping the boat but down from 32 volts to 24 volts. I have a old Wilcox toilet. And then here's a shower and sink. Walking back from the engine room, I am entering the galley, which has been redone since it was last redone in like the 70s. Quartz countertops, faucet, and porcelain sink. Plates are stored in cubbies so that they don't fall out when the boat is rocking to and fro. Previously, there was an old cast iron diesel stove that also generated heat for the middle of the boat. Ultimately, once the hull and the systems of the boat are up to date, I'd love to redo the galley to bring it back to a more era-appropriate time. Reinstall that old cast iron diesel stove to use it also as a heat source in the wintertime. I'd also love to replace the quartz countertops with a wood or copper surface. And the floors here are Douglas fir with mahogany trim. Now, as I turn aft into the salon, you can see here the old stained glass from the church. Back behind here is my dry storage, and then in here is a refrigerator that runs all the way to the hull of the boat and has plenty of space to freeze a summer's worth of meats and store plenty of cheeses and milk, etc. I do have a video on provisioning that gives you a glimpse of just how much can actually fit in there. Next we have the salon, which brings you straight back to the 1940s, where the United Church redid everything with the stained glass aesthetic, these red velvet benches, and a beautiful antique dining table that actually has leaves in it to accommodate comfortably 8 seated. What I love about the salon is it also has these mahogany ceilings on these frames, this classic old light, and plenty of natural light that comes in through these windows, which you can actually open through this really classic fixture. Along the shelves here, I have all kinds of books, travel books, maritime books, and it's become kind of a book swap from guests that I have on board, and they'll either leave me the book that they're reading, and I'm happy to lend or give any of the books that I have on the shelf out to guests of mine. I also have my grandfather's cribbage board. This book, Roar of the Breakers, is a biography of the Reverend Peter Kelly, who was the first college-educated Haida chief that was ordained into the United Church and ran this boat in the 1930s towards the end of his career, where he helped assimilate the Haida First Nation into the Canadian government. It talks a lot about the history of the mission, Reverend Peter Kelly himself, and then his role aboard Argonaut. There is so much history on this boat that I need to continue introducing it in other videos. Although if you look at last week's video, I jump into the primary history of the boat as a medical mission boat up here in Bella Bella. Now these benches here actually fold up to the ceiling and make bunks. So walking past the salon, there's an aft companionway. And right here is an aft guest stateroom, and then a lovely aft head. One of the questions I get all the time is how many people can sleep on Argonaut? Well, I have 8 beds that sleep 9 to 12 guests, depending on how everything's arranged, and 2 private staterooms with a communal space in the middle salon that have these fold-up bunks that work to accommodate additional guests, but comfortably about 4 or 5 people seems like it's right. So the sun hasn't come out yet, but finally the rain has cleared up and the cloud layer lifted. I am very by myself, just on the northern side of Ivory Island. And there's several eagles on the 2 islands next to me that have been going back and forth. A pair of sea otters, which are the cutest sea creatures I think there are, splashing around, fishing, hanging out, just having a nice quiet moment by myself in the wilderness. So we're back to some rainy weather. Turns out can't escape it right now. And the other thing is these beautiful reefs that I was talking about that made such a protection from the ocean swell only really works at low tide, and as the tide comes up, the wind and the waves are getting a little bouncy. The boat doesn't move that much, but I'm gonna move anyway today. I'm gonna head back towards Bella Bella. See you later to the outside coast. Going back to the inside where everything's a little bit more protected, and saying goodbye to my little otter friends who've been hanging out with me for the last couple days. They are super cute. So a lot of people ask me about the instruments that I have in my background, particularly those who see me on like a Zoom call or something. Oftentimes coworkers at work who think I'm just like a weird clock collector. Today, given that I've been locked down by 4 days of just pouring rain, clouds, and bad weather, it might be fun to look at 2 of the weather instruments that I have. The first is an anemometer, which measures wind speed. If you ever see those little like spinny cups that you see on a weather station spinning around, it measures your wind speed, and you can see the wind is finally dying down from the high wind that I had earlier this morning. And then the other thing that's worth paying attention to is a barometer, which measures how much pressure is in the air. The reason that's important is in cases of high pressure, when air is coming down from the atmosphere and pushing more towards the ground, it'll move the needle up. Typically, this is an indication of clearer, drier weather coming in. In times of low pressure, when air is actually moving upwards and forming clouds, creating rain, and actually making space to be backfilled by higher pressure air that comes in as wind, that is a low pressure system. And so you see on a meteorologist map talking about highs and lows and fronts. And so looking at a barometer helps give you an indication as to whether the weather is likely to improve or likely to get worse. This morning I marked my barometer, and you can see, even as I click it, that the arrow continues to increase, which means pressure is building. which is an indicator that the weather should improve. And that's consistent with the current forecast, which finally tomorrow it looks like the temperature is going to go up, the skies are going to clear, and that higher pressure air is going to be coming down from the atmosphere and rewarding us with this nicer weather. And so hopefully tomorrow I'll get some sun and start enjoying the nice summer weather again. Hanging out in Shearwater and had a quick visit from some friends that I met last year who are whale scientists from Bay Satology and were in the area doing whale surveys. We had a quick tea on the boat and they invited me out later on for drinks at the local pub. Alright, see you guys. Bye. Very tired of this weather, and even though I'm in a beautiful spot here, Jared and his team are going to head to Shearwater for their last day up here, and I've decided to go join them at the pub for something to do this evening while it's raining, get a little bit of civilization, and maybe order something at the restaurant so I don't have to cook tonight. Weighing anchor now, and maybe see you at the pub later on. Absolutely beautiful spot though. Apparently there's a lot of wolves here that you can hear at night. All I could hear was the overflowing waterfalls, which I'm not complaining about. Would have been cool to see a wolf. Tonight will be fun. So one thing about going into town from anchor is you gotta suit up. It's a little bit more than Seattle rain. Can't forget your PFD. And of course, dry bag. Headlamp for the way back. Good to go. Gonna go hang out at the pub, eat some fried food. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Next week, I'll be continuing my journey chasing the history of Argonaut as I circumnavigate King Island, including a visit to Ocean Falls, where Argonaut was based out of for over 30 years, as well as Bella Coola, which is another First Nations community and also historical logging community, which was one of the regular visits of Argonaut as a mission boat. If you enjoy these videos, please subscribe, and I have a link in the description that talks through a little bit about my goals for restoring this boat and ways that you can help contribute. See you next week.